Thank you, sir. Yeah. Well, good evening.
Good evening.
Oh, that was pathetic.
Is it ever right? That's what I want to know.
Yes, it is, but they're not there yet. They need more rehearsal, apparently. Yeah. I better have a crescendo tomorrow night, okay? But come on, this is the day the Lord has made. You shall rejoice in it. It's a commandment. So come on. Good evening.
Good evening.
That's much better. Well, tonight we are going to share our most explosive presentation with you. It's about Mount St. Helens. And of course, Mount St. Helens is a relatively small volcano in the northwest corner of Washington State. And why? Why would you want to learn about Mount St. Helens in a church service, of course? And the reason is because you're going to see the geological features on the surface of the earth change rapidly. They do not change slowly and gradually as evolutionists claim. And this is a real vindication of the flood as well. And I would also point out, if you'll take a look at Psalm 104, Psalm 104 is called a summary psalm. The first 4 verses summarize the creation week in Genesis. But Psalm 104 then, in verses 5 through 9, give a chronology of the flood. And the chronology of the flood, in verse 5, God sends a worldwide flood. Verse 6 says the waters were standing above the mountains. Now, I think you know a little bit about mountains around here. Apparently you don't speak Southern. Come on, the mountains around here. That's a Southern expression. But think with me. When you read that and you say, well, the water was standing above the mountains, and you look at the Sierras and you go, wait a minute, there could never have been that much water. And you'd be absolutely right. There wasn't. Remember that the scientific definition of a mountain is 1,000 feet of elevational difference in a local area or more. So less than 1,000, 999 feet, that's a hill. But mountains are 1,000 feet of elevational difference in a local area. So it's not like a plane that rises a mile over hundreds of miles. It's in a local area. And the mountains that you see here today are not the mountains that existed before the flood. The mountains that existed before the flood were only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 feet high, capable of being covered with 1 mile of water. And that is the amount of water that came out of the earth. When God created that water, notice on Genesis chapter 1, day 2, he creates the water below and the waters above. And the waters below is a layer of water 1 mile thick, located 10 to 11 miles down. I've talked about this before when I was here concerning the waters cleaved presentation. And so a mile of water comes out at the time of the flood, and it can cover the mountains that are only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 feet high. That's consistent also with Genesis, which says that the highest piece of land on earth at that time was covered by at least 21.5 feet of water. And in, again, Psalm 104, verse 6, the water is standing above the mountains. And this is not a local flood, as some people preach. Wouldn't you agree with me? If the water was standing above the mountains, it'd at least slop over into the next valleys, right? This is a global flood. But verse 7 then says the waters go away. And then in verse 8, it says in the Hebrew language, then the mountains rose up, the valleys sank down to the place you established for them. And verse 9, he promises he will never again flood the earth with water, that there has never been a flood of the entire earth since that time. There's been many floods, but they're all local. And so that chronology will help you. And the mountains you see here today are the mountains that rose up after the waters went away. And that's why you see mountains up to, 27,000 feet high. Everybody with me so far? Now, we're going to see how, in fact, things in nature geologically change very, very rapidly. First of all, let's just take a little look at Mount St. Helens. This is a picture of what it looked like prior to the major eruption on May the 18th of 1980. It was a Sunday morning, if you do happen to remember that. You might even have been in service. But this is a picture of beautiful Mount St. Helens. It's approximately 2 miles high, to give you some idea of the size of this volcano, but it's really just a little volcano. We're going to see what a little volcano can do. Now, in this picture, I want you to think of it this way. I want you to think you are sitting north of the volcano looking south. And since this is in the southwest corner of Oregon, what do we have? Well, if you were standing, for instance, up in southwest corner of Washington, near the Oregon border, so you're looking south as if you were, say, in Seattle, Tacoma, and you're looking south at the mountain, and you're looking south towards Oregon, and here, this is the north face of the volcano. So you're looking south, that's the north face of the volcano, and in almost every picture you will see tonight, I want you to think of it that way, that you're north of the mountain looking south. And here on the north face of the volcano, you see an area here called Goat Rocks, because here and here combining together as Goat Rocks, as in mountain goat, Goat Rocks. Also here you will notice, north of the volcano, well, you have these nice green trees. This is part of a U.S. national forest. And, well, north of the lake, north of the mountain, you see this little lake down here. That was and still is called Spirit Lake. I'm not making it up because we're in church. Hello? Now, it's located roughly halfway from Seattle, Tacoma to Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon. And because of that, it's a very popular resort area. And so here we have sustained yield timber management, but we also have boating, hunting. There are people who had land in the area before it became a forest, and do have some people living there. And of course, people take vacations there. There's various places that you can stay. It's really a very pleasant place to be, and I think you'll agree that's really pretty, right? Okay, I'll give you another chance. I said, that's really pretty, right? Yes. Oh, thank you. Birdie. Yeah. Now, I want to remind you, though, of kind of keeping those things in mind, okay? That most of the time you're going to be north of the mountain looking south, and these areas such as Goat Rocks here. Now, I realize many of you understand this already, but just as a little review for some, I want you to remember what happens inside of a volcano. This is a typical cone-shaped volcano. Not all volcanoes are like this. There are different kinds of volcanoes, but this is your typical cone-shaped volcano. And again, what happens in your typical volcano? Well, hot rock comes from below, up through to the top, flows over the sides, and builds up your typical cone-shaped volcano, right? Now, think with me too. People tend to think that this hot rock comes up here, builds this volcano. That's absolutely true. But hot rock does not explode. Hot rock doesn't explode. Hot rock foams, hot rock flows, but hot rock does not explode. So what does cause volcanoes to explode violently in some cases? It isn't the hot rock coming up from below, it's the hot water that comes up with it. In some cases, as much as 70% of the material coming out of a volcano is hot water. And this is not just hot, this is really hot. We're talking about at temperatures well above boiling. And what happens? When this hot water comes from down below, and what is it? It's the water left over from Noah's flood that didn't get out the first time. Not all the water God put down there came out during the flood. Most of it did. But there's still hot rock and hot water coming up from below from the time of Noah's flood. And so what happens? This water at temperatures of, in the case of Mount St. Helens, 450 degrees Fahrenheit. But the water that came out of the earth at the time of the flood was at 900 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the hotter the water, the greater the force. And all of you are familiar with this kind of water. How many still have in your kitchen or your grandma's kitchen something called a pressure cooker? Pressure cooker, right? How many of you have ever seen a pressure cooker that didn't hold on? Excuse me? Well, several people here apparently have. And may I ask, how much did it cost to repair the kitchen? Hello? And think about it. That kitchen was destroyed by 1 to 2 quarts of this kind of water. At the time of the flood, millions of cubic miles of that kind of water came up from below. And so what happens? This water, just like the pressure cooker, If you have enough pressure on water, you can keep it liquid above 212. That's how we used to cook fast before microwaves. You all have seen a microwave, right?
Haven't seen cooking without it, mind you.
No, I'm not talking about the machine. Have you ever seen a microwave? Oh, well, a microwave looks just like this right here. See, this is called a macrowave, and this is a little microwave. Y'all are just never going to get into science humor, are you? But what happens? The hot rock and the hot water, again, in the case of Mount St. Helens at about 450 degrees Fahrenheit, it comes to the surface, and then what happens? Like that pressure cooker in the kitchen that exploded, you get this huge explosion from the hot water. And also, occasionally you'll get this side branching, as you see illustrated here. And, well, every other time Mount St. Helens has erupted. Now, it's an ancient volcano. Evolutionists will say that it has been erupting since 1900 BC. And I would say that's probably true, because much volcanism occurred at the time of the flood. But we do know, because there were people there to witness it and document it, it erupted in 1831. It also erupted again in 1857. We know that because there were people here to document it. But from 1857 until 1980, a period of 123 years, this volcano was relatively quiet. But in 1980, May the 18th, Sunday morning, this volcano did something quite remarkable. And it gave us a natural laboratory for the last, and think about it now, the last 43 years to see what a little volcano can do. Because on that Sunday morning, instead of the volcano going straight up as it had in the past, that Sunday morning it went straight sideways, north, parallel to the ground. And because of that very unique happenstance, we've had this laboratory to see what a little volcano can do. Now, I would like you to kind of familiarize yourself with the area. What you see here is a map that is 15 miles wide, 10 miles high. It's 150 square miles. And I would just ask, if you can, to kind of remember where some of these places are, at least during the presentation tonight, okay? So let's take a look. Here at the bottom center of the map, we have Mount St. Helens with an elevation of almost 10,000 feet. To the west here, we have the North Fork and South Fork of the Toutle River. North of the volcano on the north face, we have Goat Rocks. We talked about that. And if you go straight north from the volcano here, you have this little lake up here called St. Helens Lake. In the middle, slightly to the east, we have Spirit Lake with an elevation of about 3,200 feet. And north of the lake, we have up here Mount Margaret, sort of the top center. There's only one other thing I'd like you to remember, and that is Bear Meadow here in the upper corner. Now, Bear Meadow is 11 miles from Mount St. Helens in a straight line. And Bear Meadow, it's not a bald in the bottom of a valley. It's actually a bald on the top of a ridge. And it's the third ridge from the volcano. So here's the volcano, and then here's the first drainage, first ridge, second drainage, second ridge, third drainage, third ridge. And so Bear Meadow is on the third ridge, 11 straight miles from the volcano itself. I've tried to put that detail in there because everything you see on this map, with one small exception, was completely and utterly destroyed in 8 minutes. As a matter of fact, this is only 150 square miles, but in 8 minutes, this volcano destroyed 230 square miles of forest. It did so much damage that in 1980 dollars, it did $1 billion worth of damage. Today, that's roughly 3.6 billion. 57 people died here needlessly because they refused to heed the warning that they were given. Isn't it interesting what a little volcano can do? And let's just see what happens after the first eruption that morning. We have this. Notice the volcano has lost 1,300 feet of elevation, leaving a horseshoe-shaped crater, and Well, you'll notice everything north of the volcano is gone except for that little spot at Bear Meadow. I'll explain that in a minute. But when this volcano erupted that Sunday morning, it blew 1/2 cubic mile of material north and, if we take a look at half a cubic mile, 3/4 of that, or 3/8 of a cubic mile, went north and west and fills in the North Fork of the Toutle River Valley. The valley is no longer there. It's been completely filled in. But of course, if 3/8 of a cubic mile goes west and fills in the valley here, that leaves 1/8 of a cubic mile, correct? Well, 1/8 of a cubic mile went north and east and fell into Spirit Lake. How many of you are familiar with the Japanese word tsunami? Tsunami? Okay. What does that mean in English? It's a Japanese word, but in English we normally say it's a what? Tidal wave. Yes, but most people don't understand what a tidal wave is. You know, when you hear the word tidal wave, you think of a really big wave. Is that correct? You kind of think of a wave hitting the beach and then going back out again, correct? But that's not what a tidal wave is. A tidal wave is a wall of water. Typically, it is only 1, 3, 5 inches high, but it's moving at 500 miles an hour. A really good-sized tidal wave is 1 foot, 3 foot, 5 foot high, but again, moving at 500 miles an hour. Are you with me so far? But it's a wall of water. It's a mile deep, moving at 500 miles an hour. And I'd just like to remind you of a couple of events. How many of you remember March the 11th, 2011, in Japan? There was a tidal wave. It was generated by a 9.1 earthquake 230 miles east of Japan. Now, it was a tragic event. Make no mistake, I'm not trying to say it wasn't a tragic event. But from a scientific standpoint, it was a magnificent situation because the Japanese had 30 minutes to get the news helicopters, the police helicopters and so forth in the air. Do any of you remember seeing any of those recordings? People trying to run away, and the wave just went right over them. Anybody remember that? Now, 250,000 people died. It was a tragic event. Again, make no mistake. But I'm talking about it to make a point. The Japanese even lost a Shinkansen. In Japanese, that's a bullet train. I've ridden on them in Japan. I've done mission work in Japan several times. They're smooth as glass, and the slowest one is 130 miles an hour. The medium one is 150, but the high-speed one's 180. And you don't even know you're moving. Hello? I'm serious. But a Shinkansen could not outrun a tidal wave. And of course, it destroyed the nuclear power plants at Fukushima. It was a tragic event, make no mistake about it. But I want to orient you. The tidal wave that hit Japan that day was 28 feet high. Yes, you put your jaw back in place. It was 28 feet high, initially hit Japan at 500 miles an hour. Of course, it spreads out after that, but tremendous destruction, correct? But then how many of you remember Boxing Day, 2004 in Indonesia? Does anybody remember that tidal wave? It was generated by a 9.6 earthquake located less than 100 miles off the coast. There are no videos of it because nobody survived. Now, if you do remember those videos, what you saw was the tidal wave when it hit, Sri Lanka, Thailand, India, went all the way across the Indian Ocean and killed 200 people in Somalia. Now, maybe you do remember those photographs, videos. The tidal wave that hit Sri Lanka, Thailand, and India was 30 feet high, but that was not the height when it left Indonesia. You see, the tidal wave that hit Indonesia that day was 98 feet high. Yeah. That earthquake took a piece of land 800 miles long raised it 30 feet and moved it 30 feet sideways in a matter of seconds. Interesting what nature can do. You have no idea of the power that's in nature. I mean, we think we've got, lots of power, nuclear bombs and all that. It's nothing compared to what God put in nature. And I've said that to point out that when 1/8 of a cubic mile of this volcano went north and fell into the north end of Spirit Lake, it pushed the entire lake north in a tidal wave 280 feet high. Hello? And when that water hit the south face of Mount Margaret and came back down, it brought everything with it, including 1 million trees and all the dirt down to bedrock. And because of the material that fell into the lake from the south end, and the material washed off the south face of Mount Margaret into the north end, the two came together, filled in the hole where the lake used to be, and today the bottom of the lake is now higher than the top of the lake used to be. Interesting what a little volcano can do. Well, let's take a look. Now, this is only one eruption, the first major eruption, but there were actually 7 major eruptions in this series. There were 6 in 1980 and 1 more on March the 19th of 1982. And since then, there has been only minimal volcanic activity. But the second major earthquake was 1 week later, so May the 18th, and then May the 25th, then June the 12th, on through August, etc. And there were 6 in 1980, and then finally March 12, 1982, the 7th major event. Now let's just take a look. What happens to, our look at the mountain after the 7th major eruption? After March of 1982, it looks like this. The mountain, again, has lost 1,300 feet of elevation. It has left now a mature caldera. A new North Fork of the Toutle River has eroded into the debris field here to the west, but because of this material blown out of the mountain north, it has formed an earthen dam or a dike or a levee, whichever word you like the best, but an earthen dam here, and the river cannot get to Spirit Lake. And so what happens? Well, Spirit Lake, just gets bigger and bigger. It's got nowhere to go. Everybody knows that if the lake continues to get bigger and bigger, eventually either the lake is going to breach this earthen dam or overflow the earthen dam, and it's going to cause additional damage downstream. And so what happened? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in, drilled a tunnel through the ridge right here, and the lake now drains through this man-made tunnel into natural drainage. It's a little interesting what a little volcano can do, don't you think? And let's take a look at the actual events. Now, this photograph, you see the top of the volcano here. Remember, it's an ancient volcano, and this is prior to the eruption that we will see. But notice at the top of the volcano, you see this hole in the top of the volcano? That's called a steam pit. Steam pit. Now, what has happened? Now, this is March 20, 1980. The volcano was hit by a 4.2 Richter scale earthquake directly under the volcano. We have no photographic evidence of this, but we all know what happened. On March 20, the earthquake is shaken by this earthquake, okay? 1 week later, on March the 27th, what has happened? Well, hot rock, hot water have come up through the old volcano for the first time in 127 years. And what happens? The water has come up through the volcano, turned to steam. It has bored a hole through the top of the volcano from the inside out. And so the hot water has turned to steam, bores a hole through the inside out, and that's how you get this steam pit. And this is what you see on March the 27th. And the gray here is the first sign of volcanic ash. It's the first sign of renewed volcanic activity. But of course, this activity is going to increase in intensity over the next 8 weeks. Here, for instance, you see, volcanic activity here. You see this beautiful cone-shaped white cap volcano. Isn't that pretty? Oh, come on, folks. That's really pretty, right? Apparently, your opinion has been somewhat dampened by the very ugly ash and steam plume coming out of the top. Well, I want you to think about this. How many of you are familiar with the word geyser? Geyser, you know, Old Faithful geyser, right? Comes out of the ground every so often. Well, over an 8-week period, this volcano became a huge geyser because the eruptions here you see like this, well, that's happening up to 95 times per day. And something else is happening here too. Now, again, this is early April. There's still the snow cap here. Now, in the summertime, normally it will melt away completely and then reform again in the fall. But it is really pretty, right? But something else is happening here too. Not only do we see this ash and steam plume floating down over the north face here, but here on the north face at Goat Rocks, the volcano is becoming pregnant. I know, several of you looked at me like, pregnant? That is the correct word to use when you study volcanoes. The volcano is literally becoming pregnant. Because what is happening? Hot rock and hot water are flowing in under the old volcano here, and the north face is bulging outwards, and the volcano is literally becoming pregnant. And if you don't believe me, take a little look. Here's the volcano, and there's the pregnancy. Hello? Now, this picture was taken on April 27. This is 3 weeks before the eruption. But the north face here, over that 8-week period, bulged outwards 450 feet. The pregnancy is occurring at roughly 5 feet per day, pushing outwards. And this is old, hard volcanic rock. This is still 3 weeks before the eruption, but you can clearly see the pregnancy here, correct? And let's think about this. This is old, hard volcanic rock. Do you think it's elastic? Excuse me? Don't think it's elastic, huh? So what happens if you take old, hard volcanic rock, push it out 450 feet in only 8 weeks? Well, what's going to happen? Well, yeah, but it's like any good pregnancy. You're going to get stretch marks, right? Hello? Oh, yeah, it's going to break, crack, fracture. You're going to get stretch marks. And, of course, if you look at the photograph here, you can clearly see them. Is that correct? And so what is this going to do? This is going to weaken the north face. So the north face, it's cracking, breaking. It's becoming very weak. And, therefore, everybody knows the north face is the weak side. And everybody knows if something significant is going to happen, it's going to be where it's the weakest, correct? Now, I want to point out to you that the next 11 photographs I'm about to show you, we have in God's providence. If it weren't for God wanting us to have these photographs, we would not have them. Hello? Now, volcanoes know nothing about day and night. Volcanoes work 24 hours a day. And when you study volcanoes, what is one of the things you must do? Well, you must fly over them in the morning to, so to speak, see where they're at. And then you must fly over them in the evening before sun sets to see what they're at. And then, because volcanoes will do things at night when you're not looking. Hello? Yeah, they do things in the dark. Hello? But this is a morning observation flight. And here, flying from the east across the north face and away to the west. Okay, so here we see an observation plane in the morning, and they're flying from the east to the west across the north face, and we've approached late April. And you'll notice by late April, we no longer have that one steam pit, but what we have is a much enlarged steam pit, but it's double-throated. So it's one steam pit, but it has two throats to it here. Again, we have these photographs in God's providence, and I want you to understand what you're seeing. This photograph I'm about to show you is taken at what I'll call half zoom. You see, there were professional photographers there, and they were photographing Mount St. Helens and photographing the activity and the changes that are being made. And they're trying to document, of course, what happens with a volcano, particularly if it decides to erupt. But they just so happened to be out there that Sunday morning. Don't you just love the just so happens in life? Oh, come on, folks. I love the just so happens in life. I really do. And, and well, these professional photographers are at Bear Meadow. And so, again, that's north of the volcano. And again, I want you to think of yourselves as standing with them, okay? Right? And, well, I say this is at half zoom. I mean, this is 1980. It's 35 millimeter film. We aren't into digital yet. But these are professional cameras with those monster lenses, you know? And so I'm going to say this is at half zoom, all right? So at half zoom, and this is 5 minutes before the eruption, there is a pre-quake. The pre-quake occurs at a 4.1 level, but it is shaking the mountain, correct? And this is a pre-quake because the big one is 5 minutes later. But take a look at this mountain. It looks like this. Now, again, half zoom. So this is the second ridge. You're standing on the third. So you're on the third ridge. This is the second ridge. There's the first ridge. There's a volcano 11 miles away at what I call half zoom, correct? Now, with that in mind, here's Goat Rocks. You can clearly see, again, May the 18th, middle of May, the ice and snow is almost completely melted away. You'll notice there's only a little bit of ice and snow on the lip of the crater, correct? However, do any of you see this little puffy white area right there? That is an avalanche. You see, this pre-quake, 4.1, shakes the volcano, and it starts an avalanche, and this is actually a live avalanche caught in a still photograph. Are you with me? Now, that's just 5 minutes before the big one. Hello? But now we're going to count down. So we're now at -5. You know, it's like launching, right? So we're at -5 minutes for the big one. Well, let's take a look at the next photograph. This photograph, well, what do we have here? There are two people flying in a single-engine airplane, making a morning observation flight. Again, this is 8:30 in the morning. And in this particular case, they are flying over the mountain, but they are flying to the east. So they're flying from the west over the north face of the volcano, heading away to the east here. And they're looking down at the volcano, and they see something happening. Now, they are not aware up in the plane that this volcano has just been hit by this 5+ Richter scale earthquake, but they do see that avalanche. So this is a live avalanche in a still photograph. But they don't know about the earthquake, but they do study volcanoes. The one thing they absolutely do know, they ought not to be there. Hello? Now, in a single-engine aircraft, you don't accelerate. Well, so what happens? Well, they see the avalanche. They know they ought not to be there. And they put the nose over to pick up speed, and they go down, and they turn to the right, heading south. Remember, this is the north face, so they're going down and south, which was a really good idea. You don't believe me? Oh, it was a really good idea, because this is the next photograph they took. Now remember, this is 8/32/14. A 5.1 Richter scale earthquake hits the volcano. They see the avalanche. They go down and turn to the right, heading south, and they take that photograph. Please notice that is the tail of the plane. Oh. Notice that behind them, the volcano has literally erupted behind them. And they went down and south, and that was a really good idea. Hello? But the volcano has literally, well, it's erupted behind them. Now, again, there were, these professional photographers out here, and we're going to look again at half zoom. This is 9.6 seconds after the earthquake at the beginning on the north flank, and the mountain is going to collapse. So this is plus 9.6 seconds. The volcano looks like that. Now again, this is half zoom. You're standing at Bear Meadow. That's the second ridge. That's the first ridge. That's the volcano 11 miles away at 9.6 seconds after the eruption. Notice that the entire north face has liquefied. And if you look carefully, right here, you'll see some material being ejected out of the volcano. And if you look very carefully, right here, you can actually see just a small amount of material being ejected out of the top. So it's going straight up as it normally does in the past, correct? But here, that little bit of material going straight up, this material coming out of the middle, but the entire north face has liquefied. Remember, it was broken, it was cracked, it was very weak, it didn't take much. And, well, all this material is now going down and out, correct? Well, that's at 9.6 seconds. Let's take a little look. At 30.35 seconds, the entire north flank has collapsed, and there's a debris avalanche. This is at 39.6 seconds, slightly over half a minute. The volcano looks like that. The entire north face is now falling down and out. We see more material coming out of the center here. Now you can see material coming out of the top, and this is just before the plane took that photograph from the side. You can tell by the height, right? So this is prior to that second photograph from the plane at 39.95 seconds. Well, let's take another look. When we add 7.15 seconds, it looks like this. The entire insides of the volcano are coming out. The entire north face has fallen down and out. Here we see material going straight up, but here we see material going up and over. So there's down, out. This material is coming out. This material is going up and over, but this is going straight up, correct? And this is at 47.1 seconds after the initiation of the eruption. Well, let's take a little look. We'll add a little time here. We're going to add no zoom whatsoever. This is what it would look like if you had been standing there that day without any zoom at all, just with the naked eye, what it would have looked like at 11 miles away. And we're going to add here, well, 8.3 seconds, I beg your pardon, 12.5 seconds. We're going to now be at 59.67. It looks like this. You see the trees here and the trees here. Those trees are the trees below your foot on the third ridge. Hello? This is without any magnification whatsoever. And here we see again, 11 miles away. Kind of helps you see the perspective, is that correct? Well, let's continue to take a look at what looks like a full zoom. But this is 1/10 of a second after the projection I just showed you. Just 1/10 of a second from a different photographer who was there that day. At full zoom, at 59.7 seconds, it looks like this. Now, again, you can see the entire north face has gone out here. Material coming out here. Again, material going straight up there. But I want you to know exactly what you're looking at. What you're looking at here is a natural hot water explosion equal to a 24 megaton atomic bomb. This is 24 megatons, 24 million tons of TNT, and this is just what a little volcano can do. That's what 450 degrees of liquid water. It's called hot water. Well, it's called super hot, not. It's also called supercritical. But supercritical water or super hot water is just a natural explosion. Are you with me? Oh. Well, let's take another look, and let's add a little more again. So this is full zoom, but now we're at 1 minute, 9.6 seconds of it. Well, it looks like this. Now again, this is the second ridge, the first ridge. This is what it looks like, full zoom. But I want to notice in this photograph, do you notice these, well, this section here, the right center photograph here. Do you notice these puffy white things right here? Little white pumpy streaks there, do you see that? I never can tell what's behind me, but I'm sure many of you can see them right there. Um, well, what are those? What are those puffy white streaks? Well, it's really quite simple. What you're looking at, and I'll give you the idea. How many of you remember, well, July 4th, come on, you've been in July effects. You've seen the things of fireworks in the exercise, right? So when you have, well, these fireworks, thank you. Some days, the bad thing is they're not, they're actually not natural. Anyway, but you've seen fireworks in the area, and you see these puffy white streaks, coming up in effect, and you see these these white streaks, and they've got these funny. Yeah, why am I trying to say that? It's too warm in here. I think that's what it is to me. That's what it is. But these streaks that are puffy, and they have these burning embers there, and they're leaving these behind, right? Well, that's exactly the same of what you see here, with one small exception. At the end of each of these puffy white, streaks there, that is a piece of, it's volcanic rock, solid, moving at 200 miles per hour at a temperature of 600 degrees Fahrenheit at only a minute after the eruption. Hello? Now, I would think that in this area, some of you might be possibly familiar with, well, you've seen Jack, driving, excuse me. Can we make it a little cooler here? Oh, you're a blessed and you are a person per successful. Anyway, but if you're familiar with drag racing, you have seen things going pretty fast, but tell me, how much horsepower does it take to accelerate a piece of solid rock, and the house, 3-bedroom house size? Hello? And imagine a house where, well, how many horsepower would it take to actually accelerate a piece of solid volcanic rocks 200 miles per hour?
How much does it weigh?
Well, how much do you think it would be? 60,000. I don't even think that would move the rock. But you would set with, well, how much, right? A lot. Would you settle a lot? Yeah, okay. But that's what a little, volcano can do. Now, again, take a look. This is the last photograph that they actually took before these photographers moved. Hello? This photograph is 7 minutes after the origination of the pardon? Yeah, well, the eruption. I want you to think of it with me. That is what is like death looking right in the face. Hello? And, well, that's an ash and steam curtain. It is still moving at 100 miles per hour. It is still 350 degrees hot, and that's only 7 minutes after the eruption. But it really is a picture of looking at death right in your face. Because think about what has taken place. First of all, remember the trees down here. Those are the trees before your feet. Is that correct? On the third ridge. But well, behind that ash and steam curtain, what has happened? Well, 57 people have died, needlessly. They refused to heed the warning they were given. But trees up to 6 feet across, not around, across. This is old growth forest. You're familiar with that here. And what has happened? Those trees with diameters up to 6 foot across, and I reached 6 feet, they have been hit so fast by these 24 megaton blast that they have literally been sheared off the ground, leaving the trees. They shear off like a lawnmower, flow down, and they're burning because inside temperatures are 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Paper burns at 451. And so the trees are, just cut right off the ground like a lawnmower. They fall down, they're on fire, but the ash coming from the volcano falling on them helps to put out the fires. And after that, there will be, these burnt logs on the ground covered with ash. Interesting what a little what a small volcano can do. Is that correct? Well, with that in mind, I mentioned this is the last photograph they took before they moved. I want you to know why the film survived. They simply took their cameras, threw them into the pickup trucks they had, drove them just a quarter mile over the top of the ridge, stopped, and took this photograph. Notice that ash and steam curtain moving at over 100 miles per hour hit the third ridge at just the right angle to actually bounce up and over them. You'll notice it hits here, bounces up and there. That is why they, and the film survived. I told you we had these photographs in God's providence. Is that right? Now, that's what the volcano looked for 9 straight hours. You see, this is the first eruption. Eruptions don't just pop and then settle down. When this volcano erupted for 9 straight hours, looking like this. Now, we have color photographs, but I think there's something about black and white that's kind of special, too. Please tell me, when you take a look at that photograph, would you agree, can you not just see power being released? Hello? You really can just see power being released, is that right? And let's think about this. It looked like that for 9 straight hours before it settled down, the first eruption. Now, the first eruption lasted 9 hours. That's 32,400 seconds. If you do not believe me, start counting. Talk with me tomorrow. But during that period, it produced the same energy as 1,600 Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs. That's one every 20 seconds. A total release of 440 megatons of energy in 9 hours. Trees up to 15 miles away were destroyed by the eruption. Interesting what a little volcano can do. And the ash rose up to 80,000 feet in only 15 minutes. Well, it went up 12 to 16 miles high to kind of get you an idea there. The ash traveled across the U.S. in 3 days, but around the entire Earth in 15 days and kept going. I had a first cousin living in Portland who was there during the eruption. I know many of you are aware of it and have maybe relatives that were there. But, of course, I still have a little container of that ash I was sent as a souvenir. The ash plume moved eastward, average speed of 60 miles per hour as it went across the U.S. and around the world. Now, this photograph is taken by a weather satellite taken at 9:15 a.m. that Sunday morning. If you'll take a look, this is the northern part of California. Here's the state of Oregon, the state of Washington, and you see this sort of elliptical area right here, correct? That is the shock wave still leaving the mountain 43 minutes after the beginning of the eruption. Notice, if you would, ash, at 3 p.m., only 6.5 hours, it looks like this. Ash has gone down over Portland, Oregon here, but most of it went east, crossing over the Coeur d'Alene, Montana, to the corner of Yellowstone National Park in only 6.5 hours. And right here is the city of Yakima, Washington. At noon, the streetlights turned on automatically because of how dark it was. The ash simply obliterated the sunlight. And this is May the 18th. At that time, the snowplows had been already put into summer storage and maintenance. They had to get them back out again to clean the roads because there was up to 25 foot of ash on the roads, and they had to get out the snowplows to get it off. Hello? The next photograph I'm going to share you, I think personally this is one of the most magnificent photographs I've ever seen in my entire life, and I've seen a lot. Take a look. You're in a plane flying above Mount Margaret looking south at the volcano. It has lost 1,300 feet of height. Here you can see the north face has flown, well, it's blown out here to the north. Here we see the earthen dam. And here to the west, we have the filled-in North Fork of the Tuttle River Valley. Here is the new and improved Spirit Lake. If you put a line across here, you'll notice that everything facing south towards the volcano is simply gone. Only the trees on the north-facing slopes are left. Is that correct? It is a rather magnificent photograph, isn't it? Well, do you remember Little St. Helens like that one that's just due north of the volcano? Anybody remember the little lake? And do you remember that photograph I showed you with the beautiful green trees? That? Well, this is what it looked like 8 minutes after the eruption. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the children's game Pick Up Sticks. Is that correct? This is called Pick Up Forest. What you're looking at right now is approximately 100,000 trees that were bolted up, upright, green, and 8 minutes later look like that. Hello? Well, this is the new improved Spirit Lake. Now here in the foreground we see gray ash. We see some dead trees right here, correct? But what I want you to do is look across Spirit Lake for just a moment. What I want you to do is look at a triangular shaped area here. Look along the edge of the water, back over along that line right there. That's the far, and this is the ridge right here. So this triangular shaped area on the photograph right here. Now, I don't ask trick questions. I don't. Please tell me. Again, no trick questions, but would you agree it looks like flat gray ground? Would you agree? Does that not look like flat gray ground, right? But that's not what it is. You're looking at 1 million tree trunks floating on the lake that have been pushed into that cove by the wind. We have marvelous video of the entire log mat of 1 million trees pushed across the lake by the wind, and then it goes back again as the wind changes direction. If you look, these little white specks that you see right here, those are up to 80-foot long tree trunks floating in the water. Kind of helps if you understand the perspective. Is that correct? And then here we see it's a rock face, so to speak. And this is a fully adult young lady here. Now, what you're looking at here is 75 feet of material, and it is in 3 zones. Would you agree here? So here's a cliff, and there's 3 zones. The first zone, a line here, below here, that's 25 foot thick. From here to here, that's another zone, 25 foot thick. But as you can see, a lot of little laminations, layers, correct? Each of those little layers is 1 millimeter thick, but it's 25 foot deep to all total, correct? And then there's this black zone at the top that's 25 foot deep up here. And so there's one zone here that's very homogeneous. Here to here we have what's called highly striated material. Again, only 1 millimeter thick layers, but a total amount of 25 foot deep. And this black zone at the top, again, another sort of homogeneous zone there. If you believed in evolution, if you believe that things occur slowly, gradually, geological materials very slowly, millions of years, you would look at that 75 feet and you might say, well, that's a million years of time. The truth of the matter is we know that everything in this photograph, except the young lady, took less than 3 days to form. You see, the bottom 25 feet, that is just the accumulation of the material during the first 9 hours of the first eruption. This is May the 18th, buried 25 foot of material here, and only 9 hours. Again, this is the ash from just the eruption only. But here, this area, that's another 25 feet. This is from the third eruption on June 12, and all of this formed in only 3 hours, from 9 p.m. to midnight. What happened? Well, the mountain actually produced a very fast-moving wind. Again, steam material coming out of the volcano, pushed material over this area and built up all 25 feet of this material in only 3 hours. The black capstone on top is also 25 feet of material coming from the last seventh major eruption, when a mud ash flow came out of the volcano, slid down here, up over this layer, stopped, and solidified in less than 24 hours. So this is 9 hours, 3 hours, and less than 24. You see how geological features really do change rapidly in nature, is that correct? Now, this, of course, is the Grand Canyon of northern Arizona. I'm sure you're certainly aware of it, and many who've been there, correct? And we're really proud of that, aren't we? Right? Come on, folks. It's a really big around, and we're really proud of it, right? But when you look at the Grand Canyon here, you see these exposed layers. Now, all of these layers you see here are sedimentary rock, meaning dried out mud. And so what we have here is just, layers of dried out mud. What's the first thing you should think about? How'd that come about?
Flood.
Good answer. Yeah, I mean, you can just see Noah's flood here just to begin with. And remember that the Grand Canyon is 1/8 of a mile to 18 miles across. At its deepest, it's 1.2 miles, and the canyon is 277 miles long. It's a big hole in the ground. But if you look at this photograph carefully, do you notice right here and right there, you can actually see two little areas of the Colorado River. Now, evolutionists want you to believe that that little river cut that canyon. Hello? Just pointing out that's what they say, right? Well, let's just think about that for a second. Let's go back to Mount St. Helens. Now, the gentleman you see is a creation scientist friend of mine. He just passed away last year. But he is standing here in the bottom of a canyon that is 125 foot high, that was not there one day and was the next. In one day, on the last eruption, March 19, 1982, this volcano cut a canyon 1/40th the size of the Grand Canyon of northern Arizona, and did it in 24 hours. To prove it, what we're going to do is we're going to go up on top here, and then we're going to go way over here. Okay, so we're going to go up here and then way over that way. And this is the photograph. Now, that's the three layers we were just looking at there. That's the canyon right there behind it. And it's 1/40th the size of the Grand Canyon. And, it's 140 foot deep, 150 foot wide. And this is the layers that we were looking at with the young lady standing in front. So what I'm going to do is we're not going to move. We're going to stay right there. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a zoom lens and just zoom in. So you'll see what I'm talking. There you can actually see the three layers we were just talking about, and they're on top of previous volcanic material from previous eruptions. Well, let's go over to this canyon. This is called Engineers Canyon, and let's go over here because it looks like this. Please notice that here, it has two straight side walls and a flat bottom, correct? And you see this little bit of water going down the middle here, right? There's a little bit of water down. Now, I don't know where you originally were born, came from, but I don't know whether you would call that a brook, a rill, a creek, a crick. Yeah, okay, so crick. Everybody's going to, but you'll admit there's a little bit of water there, right? But tell me, is this canyon the result of a little bit of water and a whole lot of time, or is it the result of a whole lot of water and a little bit of time? remember, two flat sides and a flat bottom, correct? Well, canyons that are cut slowly are V-shaped, is that right? But square-shaped canyons are cut fast. And so is the canyon there because of the water, or is the water there because of the canyon? Well, the mountain cut the canyon, and then there was a place for the water to flow through, correct? Let's use that evidence and go back to the Grand Canyon of Arizona. This is a satellite photograph in false color, meaning that the colors you see here are not the true color. Okay, so this is a false color photograph. And this squiggly thing you see right here, well, that is the Colorado River. Now, again, I do not ask trick questions, I assure you. I don't. I just want consensus. Would you agree with me? Water goes downhill. We all agree, right? However, do you see this sort of reddish, rusty color right here? Well, actually, that's green. That's actually the Kaibab National Forest. And the Kaibab National Forest occupies a ridge going north and south. The ridge goes north and south, but the water goes from east to west through the ridge. And so I guess we were actually wrong the first time, is that right? Apparently water goes downhill, then uphill, and then downhill again, right? No? Maybe there's another explanation. Let's take the Bible seriously. Again, remember Psalm 104, the flood of Noah, that God caused a flood of the entire earth, correct? And then the waters go away. Now, think with me. According to the Bible, verse 7, the waters go away. Verse 8, then the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down, correct? Now, think with me. This is a ridge going north and south. It's basically a big mud bar laid down by the flood of Noah. But to the east and north here, what happens? Well, this is when the mountains that you know of are rising rapidly out of the ground over there, and they are elevating wet mud layers. Now, what happens when you elevate wet mud layers? Well, the water starts to flow out the ends, right? So as these layers are being elevated, the mountains rose up, then the water's going to start coming out the sides, right? And if the water comes out on the east side, it goes to the Gulf of Mexico. No big deal. But if the water is coming out on the west side, well, and it meets this earthen dam, this dike, this levee laid down here by the flood of Noah, the water can't get through, so it starts to build up behind it, correct? Now, again, dealing with the Grand Canyon, why are you looking down 1.2 miles in the middle of the canyon? You've been there. The national park is the middle and the east end of the Grand Canyon. The west end belongs to the Havasupai Indians. But you're looking 1.2 miles because you're standing on top of a ridge. Now, how many of you have actually been there? You've seen the Grand Canyon? Excellent. I thought it would be most of you. Would you agree? When you walk up to the edge of the Grand Canyon, you look down. Hello? Right? You walk up to the edge of the canyon, it goes down. And it's 1.2 miles down. That little green thing down there is the Colorado River. But the reason is you're standing on top of a ridge. The Grand Canyon is not a canyon that's cut into a plateau this way. The Grand Canyon is a square hole through a ridge. So the water comes in at 2,800 feet of elevation. It drops 1,000 feet as it goes through the ridge, cutting the canyon. And this is a map showing this is the upwarp, the Kaibab Plateau, where the forest grows here, but the river goes from east to west through the ridge. And this shows you where there were two great lakes that formed up behind this earthen dam after the flood of Noah. And I don't know whether it was an earthquake or whether there was so much water that the pressure forced through the ridge, but the Grand Canyon is not a little bit of water and a whole lot of time. The Grand Canyon is a whole lot of water and a little bit of time. And when it breached this earthen dam, it went through there and cut the Grand Canyon in a matter of weeks, at most months. Little interesting? Now this, again, is a satellite photograph taken in the winter time of the Grand Canyon. This white you see is snow, and you can clearly see it shows the ridge here, but the water goes south, turns about 90 degrees, goes through the ridge, turns again and goes to the Baja here, and you can literally see it's a, well, square sidewalls, flat bottom, cut quickly. And how many of you have ever been doing any, recreational boating, fishing, and so on, and you've seen logs, tree logs, they're floating on the water, and if they are there long enough, what happens? The logs get waterlogged and they turn upright, correct? And when they turn upright, they will then fall to the bottom. When they hit the bottom, they may fall over, as you see here, or they might stay straight up, and then wet mud layers start forming around the tree trunks, correct? Now, I told you there was 1 million trees floating on the lake. Here you actually do see a portion of the 1 million trees, but right here and right here, we see 2 large tree trunks that are turning upright, correct? Right? Okay, if you don't think so, what about those? Oh, and during the first few years after the eruption, these trees are turning upright and they're sinking to the bottom. And today we know that there are 40,000 tree trunks that are standing bolt upright at the bottom of the lake that did not grow there. Hello? And have you ever had one of those, why didn't I think of that moment? You've had those, right? We didn't know this scientifically until the eruption at Mount St. Helens. We should have thought about it long before, but we didn't know this until the eruption of Mount St. Helens. But it turns out that different species of trees absorb water at faster and slower rates. And so what happens is one tree species turns upright and then goes down, then another tree species turns upright and then goes down, and then a third species turns up and down. And at the bottom of Spirit Lake, it looks like different layers, as if there were different forests being destroyed at different times. But now we know it's actually one forest destroyed at one time, but separated by water action. Oh, yeah. Now I want to go to Yellowstone because this is a placard paid for with your tax dollars. Hello? I would like to read this placard. It says, across the valley rise the slopes of Specimen Ridge, but the forest you see there today is only the latest chapter in a most interesting event. I think we would all agree. Is that correct? And if the evolution stopped right there, I would agree with them. Hello? But typical evolutionists, they have to keep moving their lips. Hello? So, they say this event, and then it says, buried within the volcanic rocks. Well, that should make you pay attention. Buried within the rocks. But they're volcanic. Well, there's supposed to be 27 different layers of forest that flourished, and then they say 50 million years ago. They have to put in that evolutionary statement, correct? I would point out to you that this is no longer there. They actually did away with it because it's obviously not true. But let's do exactly what they say to do back when this photograph was taken. So let's look across the valley at Specimen Ridge. Here is Specimen Ridge with 27 distinct layers of volcanic materials. But in those layers, there are fossil tree trunks, fossil stumps, fossil roots, and so forth. And while you can't see it in this photograph, I'll show you a diagram of what it looks like inside the ridge. It looks like this. And so in there are 27 distinct layers, but there are fossil tree trunks, fossil stumps. Some tree trunks don't have, they don't have the roots, and some of the roots don't have the tops, and some of them are standing upright, and some of them are laying down, right? So you can see them, they fell over here, but some are going straight up, and some of them penetrate 2 or more layers of the ridge. They're called polystrate fossils. It's my favorite kind of fossil. That's any fossil which penetrates 2 or more layers. Now, I'd like you to think about this. How many of you believe that these trees grew here without tops or bottoms for millions of years while these layers formed around them? Okay. Some of them are actually upside down. So how many of you think that these trees grew here without tops or bottoms, upside down for millions of years while there's layers formed around it? Oh? Yeah. Well, let's take a look. Here you actually see two petrified large trees sticking out of the ground that have been, they've been exposed by erosion. The guy standing in between the two of them is another creation scientist friend who's about 1.5 inches taller than I am. Kind of give you an idea of the size of those trees. But evolutionists claim that those trees, well, slowly, gradually, over millions of years, such as in a swamp, these trees died and were buried in layers, and supposedly that's how it came about. And how many of you were taught the story of how coal supposedly formed? And they'll say again that trees died in floods, and they'll say 40, 50 million supposed years ago. But this is where coal came from. That's what they'll say. Anybody familiar with that little story? Oh, well, they don't teach that anymore. They gave that up long ago, and for very good reasons. Think again of a worldwide flood. Billions of trees destroyed during the flood. They're floating on the water of the flood. They're forming large floating log mats. And the trees are rubbing up against each other. And, well, the bark is being rubbed off, floating down below, making layers of peat deposits. And, well, if there's volcanic ash falling on top of the floating log mats, and they get buried by dirt, mud, etc., you're going to get coal. So the peat forms here from the bark being rubbed off, and the trees are buried in mud and becomes dirt and rock, and so, well, that's how we actually get coal. Coal doesn't take a long time to form either. Would you look at this piece of coal? This is anthracite coal. This is the hardest, densest, blackest, bestest coal there is. It's the good stuff. Hello? Again, I don't ask trick questions, but would you agree that that looks like a natural piece of anthracite coal? Well, it does look like a natural piece of anthracite coal. That's the really good stuff, right? But actually, it was made in a laboratory in 1972. 51 years ago, we found out how to make anthracite coal, and you can make it in a laboratory in only a few hours. The only reason we don't make it is because it's not commercial. You see, it takes more energy to make it than you get out of it. So it's not a commercial thing, but we can make coal anytime we want to, and we can do it in a matter of hours. And I admit that this is a laboratory experiment. However, what about in nature? I mean, this is a human experiment, right? But what about in nature? Well, 39 years ago, Argonne National Laboratories near Chicago, which is one of the great research laboratories of the government, proved that if you have wood with kaolin clay, which comes from volcanoes, buried inside dirt with a temperature of 300 degrees Fahrenheit or more, you will get coal in 9 months. It doesn't take millions of years. It doesn't even take thousands or hundreds of years. You can make coal in only 9 months in nature. It's not hard to get 300 degrees Fahrenheit in the Earth's crust. And so let's think about this. Billions of trees were buried by the flood. The temperatures were correct, and this coal that we have today is simply the result of Noah's flood. Doesn't take long at all. As a matter of fact, we saw coalification and we saw petrification at Mount St. Helens within less than 5 years from the eruption. And you remember Little St. Helens Lake? Okay, you remember Pickup Forest? Hello? Well, this is Pickup Forest 5 years later. This is 1985. Now, evolutionists working for the Forest Service, by the way, I have to have a moment of true confession time. This is true confession time. At one time, when I was an evolutionist, I did work for the Forest Service in the Pacific Northwest, However, in 1985, there were people working there who said it would take 400 years for the trees to come back. The devastation from the volcano was so great. And evolutionary believing wildlife management experts said it would take 400 years for the elk to come back. This was not an irrational concept. After all, they reasoned that elk are large animals, would need the shade of a mature forest to stay cool in the hot summers of the Pacific Northwest, as you are familiar, particularly when we're talking here, Washington State, so on, Oregon. And I did work for the Forest Service in that area at one time. Now, here's the problem. You see these little green things here? Those are called trees. Now, it just so happens. Come on, remember I love the just so happens? It just so happens that the most common tree species in this part of the forest is lodgepole pine. Now, lodgepole pine, it's referred to generally as a fire species. And why? Well, because, this lodgepole pine has, it's got these cones which contain live seeds, but they don't open every year. Instead, these cones stay closed year after year after year with live seeds inside, but they don't open until there's a forest that kills the parents. And if the fire is hot enough to kill the parents, there's a time release mechanism designed by God that causes the cones to open up after the fire and reseeds the forest. Isn't that an interesting just so happens? Very interesting, yes. And as they say in Louisiana, I'll guarantee you, there was enough heat here to kill the parents. You can still see them laying around, is that right? And that time release mechanism kicked in, and the forest reseeded itself, and 5 years later, we already see the trees that are coming back again, right? And think with me, those trees are up to 42 years old. There are places in the forest you can't even tell this happened. Hello? And these are volcanic soils. I don't mean to be redundant, but these are volcanic soils. And when you look at volcanic soils, you admit they kind of look very sterile. Is that correct? I mean, for instance, we sent our astronauts to, volcanic areas to teach them how to be in the moon. Hello? I mean, it just looks so terribly sterile. But I want to remind you that, these soils are actually incredibly nutrient rich. And think with me, for instance, islands. I don't want to mention Maui because of the terrible thing that just recently happened. But, if you think about Maui, Kauai, the Garden Islands of Hawaii, you have these jungles growing on top of what are really volcanic mountaintops, correct? That stick out of the water, right? And so while these volcanic soils look incredibly sterile, they are actually incredibly nutrient rich. If you have volcanic soils, and of course the Sierras are full of volcanic soils, you have volcanic soils and water, you can grow anything. Okay, look, these soils are so nutrient rich, you could cut off a finger, stick it in the ground, and grow another farmer. Hello? And those are called elk. Now, we did not know this until the eruption of Mount St. Helens, but apparently elk come back from seeds. The elk came back 395 years early. Turns out elk don't need the shade of a mature forest. They can do quite well without it. Hello? Now, we're at the end of the program. However, I do want to introduce you to someone. This gentleman, his name was, and purely coincidental, nothing to do with the Vice President of the United States, but his name really was Harry Truman. It's just coincidence. But this is Harry at the time of his 80th birthday. But what you see behind him here is, he owned this lodge at the very foot of the north face of the volcano. And he ran this lodge there for people recreationally, and he was there his whole life. He is one of the 57 people who died needlessly because they refused to heed the warning that they were given. You see, once the volcano started to come back to activity, for 8 weeks, everybody knew the north face was the weak side. The government put out barriers for hundreds of square miles saying, don't go in here. This is dangerous. Stay out, correctly? But you know as well as I do, there are those people who are warned, but they refuse to heed the warning. Is that correct? Yes. And because they refused to heed the warning, 57 people died needlessly. Harry Truman, well, he's one of those 57. He was warned about the events to come. He was told to get out, evacuate. Now, I will tell you that this gentleman was a very profane old man. I will not, therefore, quote what he said when he was told to evacuate. I will simply abbreviate it, okay? He was told to evacuate, and he said, no. Again, I will not quote what he said, but he said something similar to this. No, I have lived here my whole life, and this volcano will not hurt me. I think I have proved to you that if you stay here long enough, this volcano is going to hurt you. Is that correct? Excuse me? Oh. And so, Pastor's coming, but I want you to think about this for a moment. You do not want to be like Harry Truman. You don't want to say, I've lived here my whole life and this volcano will not hurt me, because you know now, you live here long enough and this volcano is going to hurt you. Is that correct? And you do not want to be like Harry Truman, who refused to heed the warning that he was given. Amen?